Our next guest is writer and broadcaster Esther Krakue. Esther, welcome back. As you just said to me off air, they're the gift that keeps on giving. Now, look, there's been plenty of discussion this week about the Sussex's Archetypes podcast, and despite there only being a few episodes, the podcast did attract some big names, but not everyone took up the invitation, did they?
Yes. So apparently the Duchess of Sussex wrote a personal letter to Taylor Swift asking her, inviting her to come onto her podcast. And Taylor responded through a representative of hers and declined the offer. Now, we don't actually know why. Taylor Swift's team hasn't actually said the reason why she declined the offer. It could have been a scheduling issue. We know from recent reports that Meghan wasn't always actually in the room with her guests for the podcast episodes that she aired. A lot of them were, or a few of them, from what we heard, were actually interviewed by her producers, and then she would go into another room at a different or more convenient time and then record her part of the podcast. So it could have been a scheduling issue. It could have just been, it's not something that's really relevant to Taylor Swift. Maybe she didn't want to be dragged into the whole Sussex's royal family drama. We don't actually know why. But it's very clear that Meghan tried to draw as much big-name female talent as she possibly could. And it looks like that was her vision for the podcast. Obviously, the main issue here is the fact that she didn't hit the productivity targets that Spotify wanted, and it may not have gained enough traction. And for that reason, it's been cancelled, and they've mutually agreed to part ways, according to the statement they both released.
You would think if you're being paid that much money, you would make it convenient to make the time to interview someone. But anyway, by the by. But given that the criticisms of the Sussexes in recent weeks, there have been several of them, what impact do you think that will have in future for them, attracting work and attracting various types of sponsorship?
Well, this is the main issue. This is what everyone is kind of anticipating from the Sussexes. What are they going to do next? I think we have to understand the variety of factors that are at play with what's looking like the decline of the Sussex brand, if it ever was, succeeded in the first place. When they did leave the royal family in 2020 and, basically the whole world was locked down, a lot of these streaming services saw a boom in subscriptions because people were basically stuck at home. And so the likes of Netflix and Sussexes tried to, and Spotify, they tried to draw big names like the Obamas and, various celebrities to produce content for them because they had the cash, they had the spare cash, and they had people at home. Now, what happened at that time as well, when the Sussexes left the royal family, they were offered all of these deals to produce content in the hopes that they would be able to, keep these companies buoyant with an explosion of content that will keep people watching. But the reality is, now that a lot of the streaming services have seen their subscriptions drop because the world has now opened up again, and the Sussex is not really having produced a lot of content, and they seeming to not have a very specific focus on actually the kind of content that they want to produce. We now see a combination of very little content, a lot of lack of direction from the Sussexes, not great production value, and the streaming giants dedicating all this money to the couple and not really seeing a return on investment. So that really is kind of the perfect storm for them, because they don't have a reputation in the industry now for producing good quality content. The idea that they're going to keep drawing eyes to them and attention is again waning, and their reputation is also falling by the day. So even if they do produce content, if people think that they're just a sanctimonious pair of whingers trying to make money and have no expertise in anything, even if they do produce content, will people watch it? So it's really, they're not in a very favourable position right now, and I'm sure they know it because they've hired, a new PR team, and it looks like they're focusing on a bit of rebranding there. But that is the issue that they're facing now.
And on that rebrand, let's talk about that. Is that enough? Well, first of all, what will they do? What's in train, and will that be enough?
Well, I suspect, and this is my personal opinion, that it's too little too late, and the penny has dropped too late for them to do anything. The reality is, when they left the royal family, that was when most of the bulk of the work should have started. That's when they should have really curated their brand more carefully. because effectively that's what's going to pay them. In the interview that Harry gave to Oprah, he said, their plan wasn't to effectively go into Hollywood and get all these deals from streaming giants, but when he left the royal family, he'd effectively been cut off financially and needed a way to pay for his family's security. So in his own words, he was happy to sell his stories and his experiences in the royal family, him and Meghan's, to make money to effectively shore up his family's security and, I guess, make a buck or two extra while they're at it. But that doesn't really go down well with very many people. So by doing what seems like selling out their family, that effectively cemented their reputation in many people's minds. And we have to remember that they're not really experts on anything. They're not chemists, they're not geographers, they're not doctors. Meghan is an actress that got a secondary role in a hit series after more than a decade in the industry. And Harry is just a former prince. His whole life has been in the royal family. And that's not something that's very relatable, especially when you come outside of that bubble, because they just see you as a privileged man who hasn't really had to do a hard day's worth of work, because you haven't. So that's really what they're going to be struggling with. They've really cemented themselves in people's minds as something that's not very favourable. And now their greatest asset, which is any sort of credibility in the public, is gone. So I'm really curious, how far this rebrand will go in actually rectifying that. Because so far as most people are concerned, they're not experts on anything. They're not, physicists or biochemists. They don't have they don't have anything of value to give the public. And they also don't have a great reputation. I mean, that South Park episode was brutal, but very honest. And it resonated with so many people because it's true.
And I guess you're right in a sense, Meghan is an actress by profession. But where does this all leave Harry? Because really, it's his royal connection that underpins his profile.
Exactly. And, there have been reports that he was trying to focus on a series dedicated to war veterans after their first idea, which was Pearl, which was the first animated series that was announced that they would be working on after leaving the royal family. That was canned very quickly. So now his focus, from reports, is saying that he's reorienting towards veterans and trying to focus on what those people go through to protect their countries. But the reality is, in his book, he flagrantly gave his kill count, which is something that a lot of veterans were very disappointed in, because that's just not something that you do. So even in that regard, he's not a very credible figure. So it really is, he doesn't really have any other place to go. I mean, they're trying to salvage a reputation that they didn't really focus on curating properly. And now they don't have any credibility on virtually anything. So I think he's stuck between a rock and a hard place, and it'll be interesting to see how they try and get out of it.
Now, it has been reported this week that in one of his podcasts, Harry wanted to discuss childhood trauma with Vladimir Putin, Donald Trump and Mark Zuckerberg. Now, can you please fill us in on what was going on here?
Yes. I don't know if you remember that former Spotify exec that called them grifters and said that he had the most ludicrous, video call with Harry when he was trying to pitch ideas to him, and they were kind of all over the place and a bit haphazard. I suspect this is one of the ideas that he had in mind. Obviously, it's been very clear that the Sussexes have struggled to find a very clear direction with where their brand is going. Are they charity workers? Are they drawing attention to landmines? What exactly are they about? And I suspect this is one of the things that he wanted to talk about, because, Meghan Markle in particular is not someone who shied away from politics, and I'm sure we can all guess what her political leanings are. And this doesn't surprise me. Now, I don't know if these are confirmed reports, because I cannot believe that he would even think that someone like Donald Trump would give him and his wife the time of day. But if it is true, it kind of just shows how discombobulated a lot of his ideas are, and just where his mind is, and also how arrogant he is. The fact that he thinks just because he's a prince, he has some sort of, sway with sitting with world leaders and discussing God knows what. I mean, it just reeks of arrogance.
Now, we saw Spotify in the news last week. They had a bit to say about the Sussexes, but apparently they were also unimpressed by comments made by the pair during their interview with Oprah. What got their back up?
It was Harry's comment that he hadn't really sort of planned anything of the Netflix, Spotify sort of realm when he left the royal family. That is to say, he hadn't thought about actually selling stories of himself and profiting commercially from his relationship with the royal family. and it just happened because he needed to find a way to fund security for his family after the royal family cut him off financially. And obviously, you can imagine that for companies like Netflix and Spotify that had just chucked tens of millions of dollars at this couple, hearing that really was just a last resort to pay for his family's for his family's security is quite insulting. And it just shows that they weren't really, up to the task. And it also shows that they really felt like they were going to rely on other people. They were just going to chuck ideas at some, second-rate producers that they could hire in Hollywood, and then they would just make something happen. And I don't think he understood, or it came across as he didn't understand the amount of work that goes into producing quality content. We work in media, we know all the moving bits that go into just producing a show. To produce a film or documentary or anything where a visual sort of media, it takes a lot of work and it takes a lot of talent. And for him to say something like that, I think I can understand that, for a company that's offered him tens of millions of dollars, that's extremely off-putting and disrespectful.
Now, this week, the channels have been flooded with footage and photos of Royal Ascot. It's a spectacular event, as always. But it was a bit emotional for King Charles this year, wasn't it?
Yes, it was. He got emotional after his late mother's horse won the race. Now, we know that Queen Elizabeth loved horses. That was a great passion of hers. And you could actually see footage of her at Royal Ascot in the years before. And she was very excited whenever she won money, even if it was a few pounds. But I think it just reminds us that this is someone who's lost his mother. And it just humanizes him a bit in that sense because, yes, he has now become king, and the whole debacle around the Queen's funeral was a massive state event. But there was a personal side to that, which is they are still a family, and he has lost his mother, and she's effectively trained him to be in the role that he is in now, and he's still probably recovering from that, and also losing his father not too long ago as well.
Esther Krakue, thank you so much for joining us this evening. We'll be speaking with you again shortly.
Thank you.